All right, and so now we're getting into managing landslides and mass movement. So here's a diagram that shows the effects of construction on slope stability. So you can imagine, let's say this was originally stable. This was the original slope. And so we've come in and we've cut this out. And so now we have these cliffs that are much more vertical and not at the angle of repose. So they're more likely to fail. We've added a septic tank system. So now we have a lot more water here than we naturally have. So we're decreasing the friction. We've added the buildings, which adds the weight on top. So if this is going to go, because we've also not only have we changed reduced the angle, well, steeper than the angle of repose. Um, we've taken away the supporting material here to help hold this up, and we've added more weight pushing down, less weight pushing back up. Um, and the road up here, more weight on the whole system. So each one of these has more weight. Oh, the pool, just like the septic tank, adding water and reducing the friction. As well as these large trees could be breaking up any kind of bedrock and adding more weight. So you can see how sometimes it's almost like we're asking for it. Here's some pictures of some road cuts. Here's an example of a stabilized slope. So you can see here the rock is dipping towards the road. And you can imagine, especially if this is a weak rock, if this is a shale, which it probably is because this is the symbol we use for shale. Um, so this is a weak, slippery rock. Then this chunk, now that we've removed everything that was kind of holding it up, is very likely to just slide into the road. And so, how do we fix that? Well, in this particular situation, the easiest thing to do is just to remove that entire chunk. But it all comes back to economics and what is the most cost efficient way to reduce risk. If this is very, very huge, maybe that's not the best thing to do. Maybe you need to move the road, maybe on this side of the hill where it doesn't really have that issue. So there are other things we can do. But here, you would just remove that little top that would fall on top of the road. Here's an example of a road cut. It's got benching. These benches provide little catchment areas. So if there's a rock fall, it'll catch on these little benches instead of making its way all the way onto the road. And here's an example in a road cut that had a failure, and you can see this major landslide here. Again, because we've removed that stabilization on the toe of this thing is everything that would have been holding it up. We take that out, and there's nothing for it to lean against, if you will. So what do we do about it? Here's a few other things we can do besides moving that. And this isn't necessarily, none of these fixes would work in this example. But for different kinds of failures, we can do these things. So if we're worried about rock falls, we can just put nets that doesn't stop it. It just catches it so it doesn't land on the road underneath you. You'll see these quite commonly in like Tennessee and the Kentucky mountains. Now there's rock bolts, and there's a diagram of this later, but really you're just like putting large bolts back into the bedrock um, to keep the weaker, more weaker, to keep the weak rock on top. Like we tie it down into the sturdier rock beneath. This is a crib. This is adding structural support to the toe of this slope, as well as allowing room to catch any rubble that does fall down. And you can come and clean these things out too if they fill up. We can just put concrete. If this is just a bunch of rubble and you're not really worried about large masses falling on top of vehicles, but really you're just flowing onto the roadway, it's not making any kind of hazardous, just having stuff, little pieces of rock on the road the entire time. You just kind of more or less glue them in place. And then here are some avalanche protective structures where we just kind of build like a bridge for those flows. If you know a flow is likely in an area, and you really can't stop it, well, then just protect the traffic going underneath it. You don't need to stop it at all. Here's the example of, or not the example, but the diagram explaining rock bolts. So here's another picture. You can see all these little rock bolts into the cliff here. So these would be the unstable layers where you have some sandstone. This might be very friable or weathered sandstone with weak shale. And then this is going into what looks like a limestone. Would be a really hard, competent rock. And so instead of just removing everything, because let's say this just goes on, way, way, way high, and it's a huge mountain, and you don't want to pay for all of that, then they put in these rock bolts down and anchor them into the good limestone. This image messed up. In the book, it has this is the problem. The book will show the solution, but on the PowerPoint slide here, it messed up and it just gave me two images of the problem. But you can reduce the water as well. And so if you have a lot of water coming in and the water's flowing out and pushing things into this cliff, then we can take the water out. And so we can put in these horizontal drains that, go way back and catch the water and let the water easily escape without putting all of that pressure on the slope. And those are actually very successful. And then how do you identify landslides, especially if they've happened a while ago? They can be kind of tricky. Main thing is you look for scarps. This one here is kind of obvious right here, scarp. So this is falling downhill. Um, if they're older, it's harder to identify. But you can look for the scarps. You can also look for the toe where it bulges up, although we don't have an image for that. Here's an example of broken walls from the land movement. You'll see that, cracks in pavement, driveways, houses, and things from the soil shifting. If it's major or if it's in a new house, it could be from a slide or a mass movement rather than just settling and compacting of the soil. And here's an example of curved tree trunks. So the trees like to grow straight up so they can get the sun. And if the earth is moving underneath them, um, they'll be kind of they'll curve. So you'll see that, or you'll see like just leaning telephone poles and stuff. You'll actually see that quite commonly in the mountains in Kentucky too, the leaning telephone poles. And that is it for mitigating landslides.